Well, it's Monday, the 18th of November, 2024, and today I'm on the bow of Seaquestor, and the plan is to repair this. I have core and some fiberglass cloth, and underneath there, there's a piece of the deck that I cut out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a layer of fiberglass cloth, and then I'm going to put the core in. Then I'm going to put in 2 more layers of glass cloth, and then I'm going to put the deck down. Right now I have a heating pad on here to try and warm this deck substrate up a little, just because it got down into the upper 30s, like 38 last night, and that's a little cold. The epoxy would start to thicken up radically right at the beginning. So what I'm going to do is, for the first step, I'm going to mix up some epoxy, and I'm going to paint the inner skin there with a coat of epoxy, and then I will put down a piece of fiberglass cloth. And what I'm going to do while I'm mixing the epoxy, I'll leave my heating pad here to put a little heat into that. And when I'm ready to start spreading the epoxy, I'm going to put it on top of the stack of fiberglass cloth to warm it up a little bit. I also have a heat gun that I can use if the epoxy starts to thicken and is a bit of an issue. Now, the biggest problem is going to be filming this. I'm going to have epoxy all over myself, even though I'm wearing gloves. So I'm going to be a little bit reluctant to show the actual process, because I don't have a good place up here to set the camera up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get each step done, and then I will wipe my gloves off and see how things look, and maybe shoot a little more video, because you don't need to watch me spreading epoxy. So time to get the epoxy mixed up and start spreading. Okay, the first coat of epoxy is down, and now I'm going to lay in a piece of fiberglass fabric, and then we're going to saturate it with epoxy, which may take a while. It's underneath the heating pad right now, which will warm part of it up. My heating pad isn't quite big enough to do a whole piece. So anyway, it's about 50 degrees in here, so my cure time for my epoxy is quite long, probably 12 hours. So anyway, we'll get going, get the next bit down. Okay, I put the first layer of glass cloth on there, poured out what was left of the epoxy I had. I'm going to mix up another batch and pour it out, and then I've got a spreader to spread it around. Then I'm going to heat gun it to get it to soak into the glass, because it's pretty cold, and that increases the viscosity of the epoxy and makes it more difficult to soak in. But you can see some color difference there in the cloth where I already put some epoxy down. So time to mix up another batch and spread it out. Okay, the first layer of fiberglass cloth is down. It's fully saturated with epoxy, and I have gone over it with my fin roller to get any air bubbles out. And the next step is to put on a layer of thickened epoxy as a base for the core material to sit in, because that's not a perfectly flat surface, and I want to fill any gaps with thickened epoxy so that the core will bond thoroughly to the whole thing. So I'm going to put that down. Okay, I got thickened epoxy spread on there. I'm going to paint the back of the core with unthickened epoxy, and then we'll stick it down, and I'm going to roll it out. Then I got 2 more layers of fabric to go before we glue the top layer of the old deck down. So we're getting there. So quick coat of unthickened epoxy, which I'll just paint on to the back of the core right there. Okay, the core is in. I pressed it into the thickened epoxy underneath it and went over it with the air roller. And then I painted it with unthickened epoxy and then put a coat of thickened epoxy in, because this is scored cord, so it'll conform well. And I filled all the scores with thickened epoxy. Now, what I have left to do is get some more fabric down and put the top layer of the deck back down. So I'm going to stick the fabric down and wet it out. Well, I'm just about to put the deck back down. That's 2 layers of 1708 fabric, fully wetted out. And then I have coated the entire back of the deck with thickened epoxy. So I'm going to stick this guy back down and press it firmly into it by walking on it. And then I've got some lead weights to put on top of it. So I'll stick that down and we'll take a look at it when it's finished. Well, it's glued down and the lead weights are on there on each end, and vacuum cleaner in the middle, and I'll put a few other things just to hold it until the epoxy kicks. This thickened epoxy doesn't really need much pressure, just enough to make good contact. So this part of the project is done. What remains will be to clean up the seams, but I'm going to cut out a couple more pieces of deck where it is delaminated and glue in new core and rebuild it. So I got to do this a couple more times. It is getting too cold, so I think this is going to switch over to being a spring project. Okay, so that wraps it up today on Seaquestor, repairing my delaminated foredeck with Divinycell closed cell foam core, so it can't absorb water anymore. There's lots of epoxy in there to seal it all up. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.